going to introduce Erica Johnstone. She is a psychology research assistant at, I'm going to make sure it's a long one, UC Davis Imaging Research Center at the UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento. And so she is here tonight to speak about the neuroscience of anorexia. She's also on the Speakers Bureau for Stop Stigma Sacramento, which deals with mental illnesses and other stigmas related to psychosis, and anorexia, just one of several. So please give a big round of applause for Erica Johnstone.
Okay. All right. So thanks so much for coming and for being here tonight. This is really an honor for me to be able to speak more to the neuroscience behind anorexia. As Nick mentioned, I am a speaker with Stop Stigma Sacramento, which is a speakers bureau. We just kind of speak about our personal stories with mental illness, mainly in schools, also different businesses and agencies. So the first thing, I'll just talk a little bit about my personal experience before I talk about the science. And as Nick mentioned, so I work at the UC Davis Imaging Research Center. I'm also a student in a master's in counseling program through Palo Alto University. So it's an online program. And so I'm studying to become a marriage and family therapist. And I would like to work with eating disorders and also with psychosis and schizophrenia because I'm working with that and have been for the last 3 years at the UC Davis Medical Center. So, I'm also a wife, and my husband's here, Tyler over there. We have a dog, I'm an athlete, these other things. But I'm also in recovery from anorexia. And so the primary decision behind going into psychology for me was my personal experience. And I came up here to Davis to get a master's in economics. And I did that at Davis, but while there, decided to go into this field because it's really where my passion is. So my biggest message here today is that eating disorders are not a choice or a diet or an exercise in vanity. They're really life-threatening illnesses. And I'm focusing on anorexia because of my experience and my knowledge of the research into it. So my own struggle with anorexia began when I was about 12. And I was never someone who cared about what I looked like or, my image. But I was really, I was very sensitive. I was anxious. I was a perfectionist and a people pleaser. And I just kind of felt undeserving. And I didn't know that these traits would make me a target for anorexia. And so it just sort of developed, and I did not realize it was happening. It wasn't a choice. And so I really did not choose to get osteoporosis by the age of 15 or to miss out on parties or having boyfriends or friends. It's really a miserable existence. And anorexia, it's not just about losing weight, it's about losing life and losing happiness and joy and so many other things. And so it was something that made me become very isolated, just obsessed with calories and exercise, and it made me lie to my parents and turn every meal into this battleground, long before it even started. So if anorexia is not about looks, what is it about? So what I'll be talking about more is this kind of neurobiology, neuroscience behind it. And this is by no means covering everything. There are many research studies now looking into the science behind many mental illnesses, but and eating disorders are one of them. The research funding is not very high, especially considering how deadly these illnesses are. So first, just kind of introducing what anorexia is, and then talking about some of the personality traits that go along with it. Then I'll talk about some of the neurochemistry, so the role of serotonin and dopamine in the brain. And then that kind of relates to how reward and punishment are dealt with someone who has anorexia. And then I'll talk about the altered brain response to food. So the DSM, that's a diagnostic manual for all psychiatric illnesses. And so this is a definition in the DSM. And anorexia has been in the DSM from the very beginning. The first DSM in 1952 included anorexia. And so number one is just restricting calories relative to your requirements. So that results in a very low body weight for your height and age. Also, there's this fear of gaining weight or gaining fat. And then body image distortion, or this kind of undue influence of your body image on your self-evaluation. And so amenorrhea, which is a loss of your menstrual cycle, is something that was in the DSM, all the versions before this one. It's no longer in there because it's definitely possible to have the other characteristics and not have that. But so it's very common, but it's no longer part of the DSM. So that's the diagnostic criteria, but that doesn't include a lot of the really important factors. So these are some kind of misconceptions about it. So even though those are the criteria, anorexia isn't just about external appearance and how you look, even though most people think that. You know, if you ask someone what an anorexic person looked like, they would think, oh, just someone who's really thin. But it's about a lot more than that. And so it's really about your thoughts. And these kind of thoughts of self-hate and unworthiness, feeling like you're not good enough, guilt. And so restricting food becomes a way to deal with those thoughts. And to kind of satisfy that feeling of not being enough and not being good enough. So the reason I focus so much on the thoughts and these other factors are that in our society, there's the idea that eating disorders result from the media and from all the images of supermodels who are really thin, and that's our ideal. And that's true. We do see those things, and they do influence you. But you know, if that was the cause, then everybody would have anorexia, and less than 1% of the population has anorexia. So it's not just the media that's causing this. So one of the studies looking at genetics, there are multiple studies now studying twins, so identical twins and fraternal twins, and if someone's an identical twin, how much more likely they are to have anorexia if one twin has it. So based on all of that research, researchers say that about 50 to 80% of your risk for developing anorexia is genetic. So a big part of the risk is genetic and not just environment. So on top of that, you know, anorexia is considered the most deadly psychiatric illness, and about 20% of people who have it will die. And the reason for that is just the damage that it causes to your body. And also, suicide is included in that. So there's a very high rate of suicide among people who have anorexia. And oftentimes people who have it do suffer from anxiety, depression, other mental illnesses as well. So looking at who develops it, where is it coming from? So talking about the traits that people seem to have who develop it. So the personality traits that are really common are these traits of perfectionism, harm avoidance, being obsessive, compulsive about things, and also that drive for fitness. So these traits seem to be innate. So they're there, when someone is born, as someone develops, and then there are things that happen as a result of starvation. So when someone is starving, it affects their whole body. It's very detrimental. So as one thing here, so starvation affects the brain volume and causes other brain changes. And so one of those would be, as out there, the kind of fun house mirror, you might see this distorted version of yourself. Well, someone with anorexia really does see a distorted version of themselves. They really do see a larger person when they look in the mirror. And that is because the brain, the neurochemistry, makes them see a different person, a larger person. So that's one of the differences that comes as a result. I mean, as well as a lot of other physical ailments like osteoporosis and slower heart rate and yes.
Well, I just wanted to ask you a question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Some of us who are older here, Karen Carpenter of the Carpenters, I believe.
It is more common in most Western or more developed countries. It is more common, but it does exist in places where there's food scarcity. And it was found in people hundreds of years ago. So like in the Middle Ages, in the 1500s, there are cases of people with anorexia. And then also in countries where being heavier is more the ideal. In certain, there was an island that was studied, and their culture definitely praised kind of having a body image that was larger and healthier. But there were still people with anorexia there. So it is more common here, but it's still possible for it to happen even without, our society and what we have here. So let's see. So the next one. Okay, so this illustrates the reward stuff. So this was another MRI study, and people saw a question mark, and they had to guess if it was less than 5 or more than 5. They knew it was between 1 and 9, so they had an equal chance, less than 5, more than 5. If they were correct, they'd win $2. If they were wrong, they'd lose $1. So in healthy people, there was a significant difference in their brain between winning and losing. It was like, when they're winning, their brain is a lot more excited about winning. But for people with anorexia, there was no difference. Win, lose, the brain didn't really react. Another part that was really interesting is that the people with anorexia tried to find a strategy and tried to find rules about this when there weren't really any. But the authors talked about how they were trying to strategize. They weren't able to just live in the moment. It was much more about planning and figuring out what is going to win, what is going to lose. And the healthy people, no one did that. No one strategized about it. So based on that, it seems like a part of the brain that's involved in planning and strategizing is really active, like overactive. And this part of the brain is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain, so the front of your brain, is really important in cognitive control. So like planning and strategizing, finding rules, thinking about stuff. So it seems overactive. And so the fact that it's overactive means that there's this exaggerated cognitive control, which is good sometimes. It's good to be able to use self-control and to think and plan, but when it's exaggerated, it kind of takes over and prevents you from like living in the moment and just going with your gut, being intuitive. So it does seem like recovered people who are healthy really show exaggerated response in that part of the brain, that DLPFC. And perfectionism and obsessive compulsive, personality are really related to exaggerated cognitive control also. And those are traits in anorexia. So it makes sense that they're part of it. Yeah?
Do anorexics gamble?
Well, I would think not, based on the fear of losing and the likelihood to not want to take a risk. There's a tendency to be risk averse, and even in childhood, that's like one of those traits where you don't want to risk things and you want to be very careful and kind of methodical about things. So yeah, I would think that kind of brain thinking, and for me at least, I guess, that they wouldn't want to as much. But that's a good question. So one part of that is that they hypothesize that maybe, there are deficits in the part of the brain that's more intuitive and go with the flow and go with your gut. And maybe because of those deficits, there's an overdependence on this cognitive control. Because it does seem like people with anorexia are not as able to use their kind of intuition and just being in the moment. So maybe they're over-relying on that cognitive control. And so it even, we can see how that cognitive control relates to eating. So recovered people still tend not to like high-fat foods, and they still don't rate food as positive when they're hungry. Whereas most healthy people would rate food positively and would rate something high-fat as tasty at least. And people with anorexia tend not to do that and would not say anything positive about food. And so one study just looked at people's brains when they're in a scanner, giving them water versus sugar. And so in healthy controls, the brain is a lot more responsive to sugar, but in anorexia and recovered people, there's not much brain response. There's less brain response than in a healthy person. And so one part of that is that it seems even in recovered people, when they see food, the message is routed to that DLPFC, the little front part. So the message about food is sent to that cognitive control. So instead of just thinking, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, the message about food is, oh, okay, how much am I going to eat? I need to eat less because I'm going to have more later. I have to decide whether it's okay to eat, how much I'm going to eat. So instead of it just being, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, it's like there's all this strategizing and planning around food. And that decision is top down, like going through this whole thought process. And that's something that I can definitely say is very true for me. Even being healthy, there's a lot of thinking that goes into what I'm going to eat when, what later, what I'm doing that day. It's not just super natural. So there's just one more study, and this is about taste. And so it was just looking at people who recovered from anorexia, people recovered from bulimia, and healthy people. And each group tasted sugar in the MRI scanner, and then same kind of thing. There was just less activation in the brain for people with anorexia compared to both healthy controls and to people recovered from bulimia. So there was the least amount of activation with anorexia. And so from that, people do think this low activation in the brain seems to be innate also, because it happens when people are healthy again. There's still that just kind of less activation in the brain around food. So that I think is the last study. Yes.
You keep talking about being recovered from anorexia. How do you get to a recovery state? Is it pharmaceutical drugs or awareness or both?
Yeah, so I would say probably the most kind of talked about approach, most helpful thing is being in therapy. I think therapy is essential. I have never really heard people talk about being recovered without being in therapy, because it's so much about your thoughts. And it's not just like, oh, eat again and then it'll all go away. So I think being in therapy, like having an individual therapist, but there are a lot of treatment centers now where someone might go for a few months and live there, and they're doing individual therapy, they're doing group therapy, they're doing like art therapy, drama therapy, they're eating with a therapist and with other people in recovery or trying to recover. So they're in a very kind of closed-in environment focused on recovery. So a lot of people, that's helpful. I don't think they come out like, oh, it's all done with, but it's helpful. Sometimes medication is helpful though too. For me, I was put on an antidepressant like 10 years ago, and I've taken that since then.
What specific type, like an SSRI?
Yeah, like an SSRI. Yeah. So for me, it was Lexapro. A lot of people that I know have been on something like that, and it may be not forever, but it can help with mood and anxiety. So right now there's research on other types of drugs. There's actually research on an antipsychotic being used with people with anorexia because it acts on dopamine, and because of the fact that dopamine's so low, wondering, oh, would this help? Would this help increase the dopamine and help people recover, and maybe wouldn't have to be used forever and it'd be a really low dose? So there is research on other medications. But yeah, I think therapy is really important.
But changing the serotonin levels on a chemical basis.
Yeah,
I mean, you're giving us the science of the serotonin, and I'm thinking, well, don't you need to raise the serotonin?
That's right.
You can have receptor changes too.
And you could make it worse for someone. So it is really hard to know.
It's a moving target.
Yes, and that comes back to the fact that there's really not a lot of research and understanding of how to treat this. There's one of the statistics I had, but the research for anorexia is so minute compared to like schizophrenia and other mental illnesses, but more people die from it. There's it's a higher percentage of people die from it than anything else, but there's really not much research. And so people are looking at what works for treatment. The most kind of research-based treatment for adolescents is family-based therapy, which really requires the parents or whoever is living with the adolescent to be super involved in refeeding the child. Because the idea behind that is when you're that underfed, the brain cannot think well. So before anything else, you have to be forced to gain weight. And so like with that, the parents are kind of force feeding in a way. And then it's really painful. But on the other end of it, hopefully, and people say, that the brain changes enough with getting nutrition that then you can go through therapy and then, it's a positive outcome. So, yeah. Yeah.
Do appetite stimulants help at all in any of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would tend, so I don't know about research with them really. My inclination is that they wouldn't help very much, just because, with anorexia, you are defying your body's drive. So if your body is hungry, it doesn't matter. You override that and you don't eat. So I think even if you were like more hungry, stimulated, mentally you're so driven, you would just still not eat. The other piece is that because of starvation, you stop being hungry. So yeah, I for many years, I really didn't feel hungry, because after not eating for so long, it just kind of shuts down, so you never feel hungry. But yeah, I would think you would just kind of decide you don't care, I'm just not going to eat, even if I'm hungry. So yeah, but I don't know of research in that.
In a weird way, do the traits that lead or can lead to anorexia nervosa come in handy when it comes to recovery? Like the idea that, like, especially like the control factor. Like it seems like from what you said, a lot of recovery is just about like metacognition. I recognize what is happening, and now I can do something about it. Like, well, that's where that control kicks back in. Now I can control this thing that's happening instead of just letting it run its course.
Yeah, no, that's really true. I think it can be helpful. The challenge is that the eating disorder thoughts are so loud, they are so strong, that it is so easy to be deceived by them. And so one of the things that's used a lot is kind of like narrative therapy, which would be like externalizing the eating disorder. So saying that the eating disorder is Ed, and I'm not listening to Ed, and making it separate from yourself, because it can be harnessed, like you're saying. I think once you really feel motivated to do this, you tend to take a lot of steps to do it. Like people tend to, I'm going to go to therapy, I'm going to do this group, I'm going to read about it, but to actually make it happen fully is so hard, because every day, all day, the eating disorder thoughts try to take over. And it's weird. That's how I would, it's not a psychotic disorder at all, but it is similar in the sense that these thoughts are so strong, and they're not you, they're like the disorder. And they are taking over, and they tell you that you can't eat, and that you're disgusting, and so it's like, it's just really hard to ignore that and choose that you're gonna eat and be healthy. But I think they can be utilized once you really feel motivated. It's that sort of back and forth every day. And they are definitely helpful in other pursuits. I mean, people tend to be super high achievers, overachieving, kind of devoted to some career or, sport or something. It's just hard to defeat that part, that eating disorder part.
Can you comment on bulimia and its relationship to anorexia? Is bulimia like an end result, or is it separate? Or
Yeah, so I don't know as much about like the research studies, kind of the brain chemistry, but I would say that the underlying feelings and emotions are very similar, of self-loathing, not feeling good enough, unworthiness. I think those seem to be present with bulimia, even like with binge eating, with all eating disorders. I think about 50% of people with anorexia eventually develop bulimia, so they can definitely work together. People can go from one to the next, but I think there are some differences in that cognitive control piece. So I think that part is much more exaggerated with anorexia, and less so with bulimia or binge eating. As far as I've kind of heard or know of, I think in both of those, in bulimia and binge eating, there's some of the chemistry that is more similar to substance abuse and addiction, which would be more the kind of impulsivity and need to satisfy that demand right away. So there is a very high comorbidity between bulimia and substance abuse and binge eating as well. And then for anorexia, there's very low comorbidity. So because the brain is so different in like addiction to a substance versus not eating, it's a little more similar to using a lot of food to cope, using a substance, kind of using that as coping, and then the kind of guilt that follows. So I think like brain-wise, there are some differences, but definitely the feelings that give rise to them are really similar. Mm-hmm.
So as I'm listening to you talk about the neurochemistry and stuff of the anorexia nervosa, I'm hearing a sliding scale between overachievers, obsessive compulsive, driven, exercise, excessive addictions, and ultimately anorexia nervosa, and all related to serotonin levels?
The serotonin, I can't say is directly related to that drivenness or that obsession. I think the part of the brain, so the DLPFC, that front part, I think the kind of exaggeration of that and overuse of that part of the brain would fit more of those things.
More of the common factors
Yes,
involved.
is more of the common factors.
I'm hearing these common factors.
Yes.
I'm thinking, well, this is kind of a sliding scale.
Yeah,
It depends how far
those
you
are all
go.
related, yes, of that like drivenness to obsession
Right.
to, yes, and I think, yeah, cognitive control is sort of along those lines.
Seems like it's all in there, and it just depends how far you get, and maybe anorexia nervosa is extreme.
Yeah.
But these other disorders or personality traits are less severe manifestations of a similar situation that's not as pronounced.
Yeah.
That's kind of what
And-
I'm hearing as you're describing this.
Yeah, I would say, and like with this kind of research, there's not definitive, this causes it, this is the sole
Right.
reason,
It's
and that's why it's sort of, maybe, well, we see this with dopamine and serotonin, we see cognitive control, but I think the cognitive control part seems really indicative of personality, like all those traits, and so yeah, like with the obsessive compulsive, that's very common in anorexia, that was there prior. So yeah, I think that kind of ties them together.
Last question I have.
That's okay.
This might be in the, maybe getting to here, but for cognitive behavior therapy, since the reward system for food is more or less broken,
Yes.
that therapy wouldn't work very well, I'm guessing. Is it possible to develop a parallel reward of something else that's associated with food as a part of therapy to?
Yeah.
And is that a common treatment method?
Yes.
And so what's an example?
So yes, I would say cognitive CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is really really important part for anorexia because it's so much about thoughts. So I guess a lot of it is not necessarily about the reward you're getting, but it is about restructuring thoughts. So for my experience with using that kind of CBT for this is being able to recognize this thought I have, it is not accurate. It is not based in fact or reality. So that's one of the CBT skills is sort of like examining the evidence and disproving it. So let's say, the thought that I'm really fat and I don't deserve to eat. It's like, well, there's really no evidence that you're fat. What is true about that? Well, it's not true. There's no basis. So that's something that the eating disorder created, and I can choose not to believe it. So you're right, there's not kind of the reward system of like food or of a reward at the end. It's definitely about, just restructuring of thinking and realizing, I think it was helpful to learn, like, your brain does form these pathways. And recovery is so difficult, it can feel like, oh my God, I've been working on this for so long. Why can I not get rid of that thought? And to learn that, it's been there for so long and it's been just like ingrained. And it's possible to change it, but it's really deep in your brain. So you have to like disprove it and replace it with something else. So it's a lot of like addressing how your thoughts aren't true and changing them. And then in terms of reward, I guess, that's a good point. I think maybe because people with it aren't as motivated by rewards, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're working really hard on changing all your thoughts, and there's not really an immediate reward. It's a long time down the road, like, you're going to be healthier, you're going to have a better life, but there's no, like, oh, I won something, I got something. So, it's just that changing your thought pattern. But that made me think of, I think one of the motivations to get into treatment, to get into recovery, is all the havoc that it has wreaked on your life other than your body. So for me, I was in treatment for a long time, but wasn't really recovered. And the biggest thing that was like, I have to do something about this, is that I didn't really have friends, I never had a boyfriend, I didn't have fun, like all those other things were missing from my life, and so it made me like want to do something about it. So I guess that's kind of the reward, is that as you get healthier, you see that you can have fun again. Like, you have joy in your life, you have friends, you're not bogged down by that constant, like, incessant critical thinking. So that's definitely reward. It kind of takes a long time.
So that's a replacement for the angst on a certain level?
Yeah, that you get that joy ultimately.
I would like to know why it is predominant in girls more than boys.
That's a really good question. I read a couple things, and one of those was that maybe in puberty, different things are happening to hormones like serotonin, and changes are happening that are different in girls than they would be in boys, and that could be an influence. One thing that people cite is also that, so kind of the number is like 10% of people with anorexia are male, but people think it's very much underreported because there's more stigma for male than female. And it's kind of coming out more and more that, in certain populations, it is higher than we would think. So yeah, but there hasn't been much that's like clear definition of why it's more girls than boys. I think, looking at the environmental factors, there's that like societal pressure, maybe more for girls, but as you can see from this, it's not just society that's causing it. So it's kind of uncertain.
I taught middle school science for 10 years, and one of the things you have to learn early on as middle school teachers is to appreciate their brains, because it's the only way you'll understand why they do the things that they do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you learn is that they're I was going to say something, but I don't want to drag it out too long, but the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop. It's like one of the last parts of the brain to fully develop, so this is why teenagers are impulsive and do stupid things without thinking through them first and considering consequences. But it develops earlier in females than it does in males. So I was going to ask you if there was kind of if there seemed to be a difference in onset with anorexia between adolescents and young adults, and then maybe that has something to do with why it's more seems to be more prevalent in women versus men.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because just as far as I don't have a specific paper that says this, but
that's why we still do science.
Yeah, to learn about it.
We-
But based on just kind of anecdotal and seeing things, I do think in girls the onset's typically that preteen, whereas when I've seen it talked about with males, it is older, like 18 maybe, more late teen, and with girls there's continual talk of how it's earlier and earlier, and it could happen really young, but yeah, I think with males it tends to be a little later, and it definitely is possible to develop it later in like 40 or something, but yeah, it's more common in adolescence. So.
Shall we try our little activity?
Yeah, sure.
We have a little activity for everybody. I'm going to hand out a little sheet of paper here, some activities on here that everybody graduated past 5th grade, right? Anybody be willing to fess up to it? While Tyler hooks up the audio here, I'm going to task you with completing some tasks here on the paper, and while some of those thoughts that you wrote down on those pieces of paper earlier are played back to you. So maybe you can explain kind of the idea.
Yeah.
Don't turn it over yet.
Yeah, so this is based on a task, well, kind of a TED Talk by a doctor who works with a lot of patients with eating disorders, and she kind of presented this in her TED Talk of capturing the chatter that someone with anorexia hears all day, every day. And so the chatter consists of many self-critical thoughts, and they aren't just about food. Can be thoughts related to body image, but also just very self-critical thoughts, and they're kind of going all, on top of each other. So this is just kind of a compilation of some of those critical thoughts that you wrote down, kind of envisioning hearing those things while you're doing tests at school or going through your daily life. Yeah.
All right. Are you ready, Tom? On your mark. Get set. Turn it over.
I don't like my body. I'm so anxious. I have such a beautiful body. I wish my body was more. I don't know. There's too many people here that I don't like crowds. I don't know what's wrong with too many people here. Someone's even talk to me and I won't be sad about my health. I just don't know if I'll be able to move. Concerned I might not be as just getting old. I don't have not doing that I use that I ate. I shouldn't have eaten too much. I shouldn't have had that extra. I feel like such a failure to life. Everyone around me has been happy before. I hate that now I'm strong. No matter what I do, I just don't feel the right choice. What other people have. Why aren't I as strong? The world around me, why are my eyes bad? I can't just see anymore. I get anxious and I struggle with worry that I don't want to get ready. What's ahead of me? Paralyzed. Just sit there in fear and I don't know what to do. I'm just so anxious. I'm so anxious. I can't move. Did I eat too much for dinner? oh my god, I don't know if I'm too much. I'm just not happy with my weight. I don't know what's wrong with me anymore. I don't like my body. I see the people on TV, they have such a beautiful body. There are too many concerns in my body with like flares I used to earlier. There's too many people here. Some of the people I'm tired, I won't know what to say. I feel like such a failure. I'm concerned about my health around me. This is a movement. I'm a family. No matter what I do, I'm just a failure of the flexibility that I used to. The world around us is all changes too fast. I hate just mentioning that I get anxious, and now I'm worried that I'm not maybe ready, trying to head as strong as everybody else. Why are my eyes so bad? Can't see anymore. Sometimes I get so anxious, struggle with just fear. I don't just sit there in fear. Last night I don't know what to.
Time's up.
That was horrible.
How was that?
Headache producing.
Sure, I understood all the questions.
So,
Yeah, so just kind
there you
of
go.
mimicking that chatter that's going on, and it's not limited to anorexia or eating disorders. I mean, any kind of anxiety or other issues might be racing through your head that you have. But I think it was a really good demonstration for people who don't suffer from this to realize that it is an ongoing 24-hour-a-day struggle, because it's not just when you're eating or not. It's not just, related to how you look. It's all these like self-critical thoughts going on throughout the day, and sort of planning the rest of the day. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, one of the side perks of Science Night Live is you find yourself in a room with a bunch of other science enthusiasts. So even though the presentation part of the evening is over, feel free to stick around, chat with each other, meet and greet. If you have more questions for Erica, she's happy to stick around and answer some more of those questions. Looks like she's got some literature here with her for you to check out, some books and some information on her website and Stop Stigma. And yeah, absolutely, feel free to stick around. Lights are staying on. I'm not going anywhere. So got a round of applause for Erica Johnson. Every first Wednesday, Science Night Live. Tell all your family, friends, and neighbors. See you next time.